All right, we're going to get started. Make sure that you have a handout for our time together. It's a privilege to have Mike Spencer here and his wife Barb. We've been blessed with their ministry. This session is kind of a follow-up for what we just heard, how to have conversations about the issue of abortion. So this is the Art of Persuasion. Let me commit our time together with the Lord in prayer. God, thank you for Mike and Barb and their ministry. We commit our time to you and ask that you would equip us, encourage us, give us courage, and that you would use us as instruments in your hands to bring about redemptive work, all for the sake of your glory. Thank you for Christ and He makes all of this worthwhile and possible. We pray in His name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Pastor Matt. Well, again, it is great to be with you today. I mean that. This is really wonderful. I am grateful to Pastor Matt. I meant to say this in the worship service, and I feel badly that I forgot, but I think where a pastor stands on the issue of abortion, and when I say stands on the issue of abortion, I don't just mean that he doesn't like it, but a pastor that speaks out, I think it says so much about his love for God and his people. And so you are blessed to have this. We had dinner with them last night and just getting acquainted. We met again almost a year ago, I think it was, but we didn't have the opportunity to meet Evangeline, but we just had a wonderful time with them yesterday evening. So thank you again for this. I have to tell you just a little disclaimer here at the beginning. Everywhere I go, people complain that I talk too fast. And I always respectfully tell them that's not the problem, it's that they listen too slow. So, joking aside, of course, I do move rapidly, and we're going to move rapidly through this here this morning, but I think this will be helpful for you. Again, I want to share with you 6 strategies for winning the abortion debate without losing your opponent, because I think we're called to win it. I say that because 2 Corinthians 10:5 makes it very clear that we're to demolish arguments and any pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of Christ. So we're supposed to win the debate. But as I think you know, you can win the debate and at the same time lose your opponent. In other words, you can have the right answers, you may have great rhetorical skills, you may be able to shut them down, but that's not necessarily winning the debate. So I want to really talk about how do we win the debate without losing our opponent. As you know, our nation is bitterly divided over everything today, but we are certainly bitterly divided over abortion. And it does seem like, unfortunately, we are becoming meaner by the minute as a culture. Debates, whether it's on social media or face-to-face, debates over major moral issues like transgenderism, abortion, pornography, whatever, often decay into really nothing more than a giant game of gotcha. I mean, you see this all the time, right? On Facebook or on YouTube video clips, where people are debating, let's say abortion, and in watching them, you can tell that oftentimes they're not listening to the other one. They're just waiting to lunge. They're waiting to trap the other person, make the other person look bad. That's not what we're called to do. Paul says this in Colossians. He tells us, and this is a commandment, right? He says, be wise in the way that you act toward outsiders. Make the most of every opportunity. Let your conversation always be full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. I'm a passionate guy about a lot of things, but I'm particularly passionate about the gospel and about abortion. And I've got strong opinions about this that I think are rooted in God's word, okay? And I understand what it's like when you feel deeply about something like abortion and you're talking to somebody who's obnoxious or they're not a good listener or whatever. Sometimes the worst in them can bring the worst out of you. And so it's really vital that we have good arguments, but that we can present them in a gracious manner. Now, I understand that sometime back, I don't remember, Pastor Matt, you studied Greg Kokel's Ambassador Curriculum, or was it the Tactics book? So some of what I'm going to share here this morning comes right from that. And if you've already been trained in that, you're probably already a step ahead here in this. But I think this is just a wonderful commandment for us to keep in our hearts and in our minds. Real quickly. Remember, we don't have to vilify our opponent. We don't have to make enemies where we don't have to. They may choose us as enemies, but we don't have to make them our enemy. And it's not just about having a good argument. It is about presenting that argument in a Christ-like manner. And so let me move through this here. We're going to dive in here. Here we go. Here's the first of 6 strategies. By the way, these are not in any specific order. These are things that I have found helpful in my work over the last 13 years that I've learned from other guys like Greg Kokel or John Lennox or other people that I have respected, and just some things that I've added in here just from my own failures and successes in talking to students on campuses and so forth. But one of the things I think is so important is that we take an honest interest in others, and that we watch, and as a result, we will watch our conversations start and flow more naturally. This is something that most people don't do well. Now, I want to encourage you to think about something. Think about that friend of yours, or maybe it's a family member that you've gone to lunch with recently, and you think about the conversation. What did take place in the conversation? Did you ask good questions, or did you talk about you? Do you know, after you've had that 1-hour breakfast or lunch with them, do you know more about them? Do you know more about their family, their children, their singleness, whatever it is that they're going through in life? This is something people just don't do well, generally. Again, I'm not suggesting you don't, but God is in the people business, and we really ought to be in the people business as well. And oftentimes the greatest obstacle to productive conversations about abortion isn't the difficult nature of the subject itself, but rather the difficult nature of our own selfish hearts. Now, again, I'm not indicting you necessarily, but I think that this can be a struggle. Sometimes we can become so self-focused that we miss out on opportunities. So, letter A here. Oftentimes, the most effective way to start conversations about abortion is to talk about other things and simply wait for natural openings. Uh-oh. Crisis. Oh, no, it came back. What happened there? I don't know. We lost the screen, and then it came back. So, all right, we're good. So this is a skill I think that each one of us can and should work to develop. And it starts by asking these questions. Am I the kind of person, honestly, who takes an honest interest in other people? Or am I only consumed with talking about me? Am I the kind of person who's interested in other people's opinions, even when those opinions don't agree with mine? Could you talk to a person who is for abortion and say, help me understand your position, and then just be quiet and let them talk? And when they were done talking, instead of arguing with them, just saying, well, thanks for sharing it with me. Could you do that? Because if you can do that, you're on your way to being able to really build some good conversations with people. 1 Peter 3:15, Peter writes, always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. Now, he says, always be prepared to give an answer. That's from the Greek word apologia, which we translate into the English word apologetics, which doesn't mean I'm sorry, but it means a defense or an argument. So you could rightly translate 1 Peter 3:15 to say, always be prepared to give an argument. God has called us to be arguers. But what kind of arguers? Well, arguers in the classical sense of the word, the way an attorney would argue on behalf of a client in a court of law. He or she would present good reasons to believe that his or her client was innocent, right? Now, he goes on to say, but do this with what? Gentleness and respect. Now, I've heard people say this, not a lot, but I have heard people say this in the past. Well, I just couldn't argue about abortion. I'm so passionate about it, I would just lose my cool. That's actually a shameful confession. Shame on you if you think that way. We should be living by God's Spirit. We should be able to have conversations with people who are nasty and mean even, and who don't agree with us, and we should be able to do that in a way that's gracious and kind. This is what we're called to do. And that can be very disarming. That goes a long way in having these kinds of conversations. The other thing to note here about 1 Peter 3:15 is it's defensive in nature. It's not offensive. So in other words, just be prepared. Just be ready. Okay? Now we've got offensive passages. We've got Matthew 28, go into all the world and make disciples. That's offensive. But the posturing here is defensive. Just be ready. Now here's the problem. When was the last time somebody came up to you and said, tell me about your Jesus? When was the last time a stranger or somebody at work came up and said, tell me about your pro-life convictions? Nobody ever does this, right? So we've got to get them to ask. And one of the ways that we get people to ask is by asking them questions. Not necessarily questions about abortion, just questions in general. I want to share a quick story with you. This happened several years back now, I think about 7 or 8 years ago. I was on the way home from a speaking engagement. I got on my flight, and I was on an aisle seat. And here's the aisle to my left, and then there's 3 seats, the aisle, and 3 more seats. I'm on the aisle seat. And right after I sit down, this young man sits down and looks like a pretty sharp guy, maybe in his late 20s, something like that. And I'm type A, I'm an extrovert. So I sparked up a quick conversation, just said, hey, how you doing, where you headed to, today, and so forth. And we got talking, and I discovered, in just asking some friendly questions, that his name was Reagan. And yes, his parents were good conservatives, okay? He told me that. And that I learned that he had married 2 years earlier, that he was newly married, that he was working for the United States Air Force doing computer or some kind of software work for them, and that he was returning home from a business trip. So just some light conversation. We talked about 10 minutes or so before the plane departed, and then we each opened books to read, and that was the end of the conversation for the next hour or so of the flight. Well, about 20 minutes before the plane landed, I couldn't help but notice, being type A, that Reagan had closed his book. So I saw opportunity. Now, to be clear, I wasn't looking for a chance to talk to him about abortion. I wasn't even in my mind. I just like people sometimes, some of them. And so I just saw an opportunity. So this keeps freaking out. It's got a demon or something. What do we do about that? Do we worry about it? I'm not worried if you're not worried. As long as it keeps coming back up, I guess we're all right, okay? All right, we'll go with it, yeah. All right. Which is Pastor Matt's way of saying he doesn't know anything more about computers than I do, but that's okay. Actually, he knows a little bit more. We talked about that. But anyway, so 20 minutes or so before the plane landed, I noticed that Reagan closed his book, right? And so I saw opportunity, so I started asking another question or two. And eventually, Reagan asked me, "What do you do?" I love that question. I've got an answer that everybody loves. I said, well, I said, I'm in the human rights business. I advocate for human equality. And I said, I actually advocate for the most oppressed people group in our land, and that's the unborn and their mothers. Now, without skipping a beat, without any nervousness at all, he just looked at me and said, that's interesting, so you're pro-life. I said, yeah. He said, I'm pro-choice. Tell me why I should be pro-life. Do you believe that it really did? I know it sounds like I'm making this up. I was like, nobody's ever done this before, right? It's like golden opportunity. And I said to him, I said, well, actually, Reagan, you shouldn't be pro-life if the science of human embryology is wrong. Well, that piqued his interest, got his curiosity. He said, what do you mean? Well, that launched us into a very meaningful conversation about the nature and the value of the unborn child and why abortion was wrong. And we went back and forth. Very friendly fire. He was not threatened by this at all. Now, the interesting thing about the story was that the people in the 2 or 3 rows in front of us weren't even pretending not to be eavesdropping. They had positioned themselves in the chair. A couple of them had positioned themselves. They were in on it. Now, thankfully, they kept their mouths closed, so it didn't disrupt our conversation, so we were able to have it. But we had an audience there, okay? So the conversation continued on, and no, I didn't have Reagan on his knees at the end of the flight in sackcloth and ashes and repenting of his pro-abortion views, but I planted a seed with him. And if you, again, are familiar with Greg Kokel's ministry, as I know many of you are, I planted a seed. As Greg Kokel said, I put a pebble in his shoe and got him thinking, okay? So I considered that a win. Now, the second part of the conversation, or the second part of the story, I guess, is that I had ended the conversation. We were landing, and I ended the conversation, and everybody jammed into the aisles to get off, but we were sitting in the back, so we stayed in our seats. Eventually, we got up, and just as we're walking out with all these people in front of us, Reagan says to me, because in the conversation, he had discovered that I'd been married for several years. At that point, I think it was about 34, 35 years, 36 years, I forget. And he said, so you've been married 36 years. What's your secret? And I said, well, actually, no secret at all. I said, my wife and I are followers of Christ, and we've built our marriage on his principles and his commands, and that's made all the difference. And he said, that's interesting, thanks, and that was the end of it. No, I didn't lead him to Christ. I didn't take up an offering, none of that. But again, I had planted a pebble in his shoe. I'd got him thinking about things. Anybody can do this. I'm not so clever. Anybody can do this just by taking an honest interest. Now again, I wasn't baiting Reagan. I wasn't baiting him with questions so that he would ask me what I did so I could talk to him about abortion. But it naturally went there. Sometimes the easiest way to make conversations, again, is just to look for natural openings. To take an interest and then look for natural openings. Secondly, letter B, effective conversations about sensitive subjects like abortion depend on trust. And as the conversation with Reagan demonstrates, that trust can be built with a stranger on a plane in a few minutes by showing yourself friendly, by taking an interest, by being a good listener, and by being the one to end the conversation, which I'll say something more about later. We hear sometimes that people are tired of hearing about abortion. I think that's an excuse. It's an excuse not to dive into those conversations. The reality is, in my experience, anecdotally, is that people are very interested in discussing abortion, but they're much more inclined to do so when they know that our interest in them is genuine, and again, not a sneaky sales tactic in order to bait them into conversations about our pet topic. All right, moving on. I alluded to the second point here in my opening. Excuse me. And that is this. We need to define winning biblically. When we're talking about the abortion debate, we need to define winning biblically. This has been a hard-learned lesson for me because I'm the kind of guy that wants to back the truck up, put the tailgate down and unload the whole truck of truth on somebody. And I want them on their knees in sackcloth and ashes, repenting. And it doesn't work that way. And it's taken me a while, beating my head against the many walls to learn this. Winning is not defined by or limited to changing your opponent's mind. People are complicated. There's no like little clever little, one-liner that you're going to have them on their knees, right, repenting. People are more complicated than that. They need more than a cliche or even a good answer from us. Sometimes they just need time, right? So it can't be defined by changing our opponent's mind. Ultimately, that's God's work. Our work is to be responsible with the opportunity, to make the most of the opportunity as Paul commands us to do. Secondly, winning is being faithful with the opportunity. I'm sorry, I guess I just said that, and trusting God for the results. And then thirdly, winning should never mean embarrassing your opponent. Please hear me on this, because you've seen this on social media. Maybe you've experienced it in face-to-face conversations, but you'll see on social media, you'll see memes, or maybe not memes, maybe it's a YouTube video somebody's posting, and it'll be titled, pro-lifer destroys pro-choice person, or a Christian destroys atheist. Is that what Christ has called us to do? I thought he's called us to destroy their arguments, but not destroy them. Now, you might say, well, it's just that way it's worded. Yeah, I think you're right. It's probably just the way it's worded, but it's not helpful. We're not about crushing people. We're about crushing their arguments while affirming them. Not affirming their views necessarily, but affirming them as valuable persons, right? If you embarrass your opponent, you run the risk of further galvanizing them in their position. Because pride is a thick wall, and it gets a lot thicker when we get embarrassed, right? As Greg Kokel says, most arguments are not won on the spot. And think about it, you've undoubtedly you've changed your position on something, maybe a theological thing or a moral thing or something. Somebody's argued it with you. Think about how that happened for you. Probably you didn't in the middle of the conversation go, right? You know what, Sally, you're right, I'm wrong. That's probably not what happened. Probably what happened was Sally argued, made a good argument, you got embarrassed and realized, my position's not very good. And then later, days later, weeks later, months later, you changed your position. Don't embarrass your opponent. Don't beat them down with your great rhetorical skills or your great knowledge. Make it easy for them to change their mind. And then finally, winning arguments is relatively easy, but winning people is the greater reward. So I have this little self-imposed rule. My self-imposed rule is whenever I'm in a conversation with somebody about abortion, I want to treat them in such a way that if they show up to my church Sunday and sit next to me, I will have nothing for which to be embarrassed over and nothing for which to apologize. In other words, when they walk away, I want them saying, he's not like MS Now said he was, or he's not like CNN said he would be. Because we're up against a narrative, right? The narrative, which is, I think, very unfairly put on us, is that we're a bunch of right-wing bigots, we hate women, we want to steal reproductive rights away, blah, 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 we're stupid, we're ignorant. When they meet somebody who's not any of those things, that has a powerful impact. They're left going, that's not what I heard it was going to be like. So that can have a great effect on people. 3, attack arguments, not people. I think I've already kind of alluded to this, but you are familiar with Antonin Scalia, the former and now late Supreme Court Justice, brilliant mind, who said this. He wasn't talking about abortion, but it applies here. He said, I attack ideas. I don't attack people. And some very good people have some very bad ideas, and if you can't separate the two, you've got to get another day job. I think that's extremely well said. Extremely well said. 2 Corinthians 10:5, I already referenced this. We demolish arguments. We don't demolish people, okay? So be careful, as I said earlier, not to demonize your opponent, not to vilify them. You probably have neighbors, family members, friends who are sweet-spirited, who genuinely care about women and about children. They're good moral people, but they support abortion. And it's kind of a mystery. Like, how could Aunt Sally be for this? She bakes cookies for her neighbors. How could this be? Some really good people have some really bad ideas. Now, it's also true that some really bad people have some really bad ideas, and they're not fun to talk to. But regardless, we don't have to make enemies out of people. We can love them even if they are our enemies, right? Stay cool under fire. Don't take rejection personally. I don't spend a lot of time on university campuses, but when I do, I can tell you the vast majority of students I will encounter in that day are not going to be persuaded. I am not going to be successful because most people are emotionally and ideologically glued to their positions and they can't see the forest for the trees. That's unfortunate, but we're raised in a culture that's been told what to think but not how to think, and so it makes it a real challenge for us. But if I remain cool under fire, if I'm respectful of them and kind to them and I'm a good listener and I try to find ways to find common ground and so forth, I find that even my most hostile opponents will generally calm down to the point where we can have a meaningful dialogue. Because a lot of them come to the conversation loaded for bear. They just assume you're going to be mean and nasty to me. So they come ready to kill. But when they see that you're humble, and by the way, I'm not bragging about my humility. I've got my wife here, she could blow the whistle on me. But when we are humble and we're kind and we've got good answers and we're willing to listen, that is disarming for people. And that's what they will remember. If they don't remember your arguments, which hopefully they will, they'll remember that you weren't what they were told that you would be. All right? Greg Koukl has a self-imposed rule. You maybe have heard this when you went through his training. He said this: if anyone loses his temper, he said, when I'm in a debate, if anyone in the debate, me or my opponent, loses his temper, I lose the debate. Have you guys heard this before through Greg Koukl's training? No? Can you take a guess at what do you think he means? What do you think he means? Anybody take a shot at it? You get a free, crisp $50 bill from Pastor Matt if you get this right. Does anybody know? What do you think Koukl's point is here? If anyone loses their temper, I lose the debate. If you think too deeply, you're going to miss it. It's right there on the surface. Here's his point. If you lose your temper, I forget your name, sir, I'm sorry, we met. What's your name? Don. So let's say Don is my pro-abortion opponent, and we get into an argument, and I keep my cool, but he loses his cool. I'm not going to be able to persuade him because he's no longer listening. That's what Greg is saying. So I can't completely control Don's responses, but there are some things I can do that will go a long way in cooling him down, calming him down. Again, being a good listener, being kind, being respectful, asking his name, Don, nice to meet you. Things like that. Easy to do, and anybody can do it. Never answer a question. This has been said. Somebody said this once. I think it's a great quote. Never answer a question. Always answer a questioner. I'm watching the time here. I think this is a really, really great little maxim for us to remember. Never answer a question. Always answer a questioner. Here's what's meant by that. Somebody comes to you and says, all right, you've got good arguments, but what about rape? What about a 14-year-old girl who gets raped and becomes pregnant? Are you going to force her to carry that baby to term? Well, you can do what a lot of pro-lifers do and say, well, that's less than 1% of all abortions, which is absolutely true. But that's not helpful. Not if you're the 14-year-old girl who has been raped and now has a baby that you didn't choose to conceive. So if all I do is answer the question apologetically, I'm going to say, well, that's less than 1% of all abortions. But if I think, maybe this woman that's asking this question or this man has either been raped or has a loved one who's been raped, now I'm going to answer that question differently, aren't I? Now I'm going to lead not with an apologetic answer, I'm going to lead with compassion. So the first thing I'm going to say to that is, well, Sally, thanks for bringing that challenge to me. You're raising a good point. Because women and young girls do get raped and do get pregnant, and I can't imagine it. You know what, Sally, I'm married to a woman, I have 4 daughters, and I have 5 granddaughters. And I can't imagine one of my loved ones being raped, only to find out weeks later that now she's pregnant with a baby she didn't choose to conceive. This would be horrible, wouldn't it? Now, to that point, I haven't even answered Sally's challenge. But what I have done is shown that I'm human, and that I'm respecting her humanity as well. I'm showing compassion. Then I can go into the actual answer and explain why abortion is not a good answer for rape. We shouldn't give the death penalty to innocent children for the crimes of their guilty fathers and other things. The question in the case of rape is not how was one conceived, but was one conceived. So again, there's more of an answer than that. But you see what I'm saying? We don't want to just answer the question. We want to speak to the person behind that question. All right. Am I moving too slowly? All right. Number 4, create and navigate conversations about abortion by asking good questions. This is right out of Greg Koukl's tactics book. He's known for this. He calls it the Columbo method. You know, if you're familiar with the old disheveled TV detective, right, in the 70s, who looked like he slept in his trench coat and drove this old beat-up car. And if you remember the show, at the beginning of the show, you would always know as the TV audience who the murderer was, but he didn't know. But he would figure it out right away. Early into the 1-hour episode, he'd figure it out. But he'd spend the next hour getting to the answer, getting to a confession, or at least a conviction of this guy, by whittling him down with questions. You remember, oh, well, excuse me, sir, I noticed the ashtray had ashes in it, and you said, and you know, and then he would leave the guy's house, and the guy would breathe a sigh of relief, the murderer would breathe a sigh of relief, and then all of a sudden the door would open, and he'd walk through unannounced again with another question. Remember that? Greg Koukl calls it the Columbo method. It's very clever. It's actually the Jesus method, isn't it? Jesus asks questions all the time of his listeners, of his audiences. Why do you call me good? No one is good but God alone. Whose inscription is on that coin? Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and not do what I say? So Jesus did this. Questions are a nice way, a respectful way of helping people. They're friendly and they're affirming, assuming they're asked in a friendly way. If they're asked like this, well, if you're going to play gotcha and you're going to ask questions that way, it's not helpful. But if you say, well, look, do you mind if I ask Don why you think that? If you just ask it warmly, this is a great way. It's helping people help themselves come to the conclusion why their position is wrong. The answers that they give are going to provide you with a valuable education. Let them talk. Let them talk. Ask them questions, then listen to them. They may tell you they're against abortion for this reason, but the more you listen to them, the more you find out, no, there's actually another reason they're against it. And that's where I need to go. So this is really helpful. And then thirdly, it allows you to make progress on a point without being pushy. All right, I'm trying to think if there's a story here I want to share, but I'm going to hold off on that. Let's move on here. Here's some questions that you can ask abortion supporters. And by the way, if you want a longer list of these, if you go to the website, projectlifevoice.com, go to the resources tab, and then there'll be a drop-down that says abortion Q&A. At the very end of that section, you'll see a whole list of questions you can ask. But these are questions I like to use. Sally, do you mind if I ask, do you believe in human rights? And if so, who should get them? And when should they get them? It's not a trap. The question's not meant as a trap. It's meant to find out where she's at. Because if she says, yes, I believe in human rights, boom, we've got some common ground here. If she says, I think they should get them at birth, we don't have common ground there, but we can work from that point. So this is just to kind of analyze where she's at and to build some common ground. Here's another one. Sally, can you tell me, what does abortion do? Because I find on campuses, students don't know. They'll say it removes some tissue, it removes a collection of cells. They've never seen it with their own eyes. They don't really know what it does. I mean, in many cases they do and they don't care. That's another issue, okay? But here's one. Is there any point during pregnancy that you believe abortion is wrong? I love this question because most people will say yes, all right? Most people say, yeah, I think it's wrong after the 6th month or at some point, some arbitrary line that they've decided. Well, now I can say something like this. Oh, well, that's interesting. I also agree abortion is wrong at that point. So we actually have some common ground. We're both pro-life after 6 months. Now, that'll probably make them nervous because they don't want to be called pro-life, okay? But I'm trying to help them see that they oppose abortion, so do I. The difference is I oppose it all the time and they don't. But again, I can work from that, all right? So here's one more. Sally, do you believe it's okay to target children for abortion simply because they've been diagnosed with Down syndrome? Or because they're the wrong gender? Or they're the wrong skin color? You see, we can find common ground with people on these kinds of things. I'll tell you, I've got this story I'm itching to share with you. We'll see if we have time at the end. Let me move on. Number 5, avoid bunny trails by staying focused on the main thing. You've got to stay focused on the main thing. Your opponent, your pro-abortion opponent, is going to want to take you off into the weeds. They're going to want to talk about women's rights. They're going to want to talk about a messed up healthcare system. They're going to want to talk about a messed up foster care system. They're going to want to know why you haven't adopted all of the babies if you're so pro-life, right? They're going to want to take you off into the weeds. These are red herrings. Don't let them do that to you. Stay focused on the main thing. The main thing is, what are the preborn? That's the real question. Let me share a quick syllogism with you. Syllogism is just an argument, okay? And an argument's a particular kind of thing, right? My body, my choice is not an argument. That's a cliche. Every child who wanted a child, that's a cliche. That's a slogan. We're presenting an actual argument. So in a good argument, you have a major premise, a minor premise, and then you have a conclusion. Here's our major premise. It's wrong to intentionally kill innocent human beings. Almost no one disagrees with that. The second premise, though, is what we're debating, and that is that abortion does that abortion does intentionally kill an innocent human being. If you, as a pro-life ambassador, can make the case that this is true, then the conclusion follows abortion is therefore wrong. You've got to stay focused on this. You may not share this verbally with your opponent, although you may, but you've got to have it cemented in your mind because they're going to want to go to all the hard cases. What about rape? What about life of the mother? And it's not that we don't have to have good answers for that. We do. But that we need to stay focused. Frankly, the answers to those challenges is dependent upon on this syllogism. So keep this rock solid in your thinking. So 2 crucial questions that we need to remember, and these are, when I do pro-life apologetic training, this is the heartbeat of my training, okay? Of a 2 or 3 hour workshop, this is the heartbeat of it this year. These 2 questions. Number 1, what are the preborn? We go to the science of human embryology for an answer, as I did this morning in the worship service. They are distinct, living, human, and whole from day one. That's the consensus. Number 2, what makes humans valuable? Are we valuable because of what we can do, or because somebody wants us, or because we're normal, or are we valuable simply because of the kind of thing that we are, namely human beings created in God's image? We can defend that all day long. That's the foundation, again, for human equality and for universal human rights. Now, again, you've got to be able to unpack that, and we can't take the time this morning to do that, but this is really, really, really important that you know the answer to those 2 questions and you can stay focused. By the way, at the risk of sounding like a sleazy, greasy sales pitch, in my book, if you're interested, at the book table, Chapter 3 deals entirely with the question, the first question, what are the preborn, deals with establishing the biological nature of that child from day one, from the zygote stage. Chapter 4 in the book deals exclusively with the question, what makes humans valuable? And how do we build a case for that? So if you're interested, those 2 chapters would be of particular interest to you. So avoid bunny trails, stay focused on the main thing, don't let them take you off into the weeds. You don't have to adopt any babies to say that killing babies is wrong. Now, again, Barb and I are adoptive parents, okay? So we're all for adoption. I think adoption is great. But you don't have to adopt any babies to say that killing them is wrong. That would be like living in 1850 and saying you can't be against slavery unless you're willing to give all the slaves a job and a house. That's a ridiculous argument, right? Don't be intimidated by people with that kind of an argument. Just boldly say to them, I haven't adopted. I think adoption is a great thing. I haven't done it, and I don't need to explain to you why. I haven't done it. But why do I have to adopt to say that killing children is wrong? That's a ridiculous argument, okay? By the way, usually my opponents are asking me if you adopted. They haven't adopted, okay? They're just using this as a cudgel to beat me down. All right, are you ready for the 6th point? This is the magic one. Are you ready for this one? Yes? Don't be weird. Don't be weird. Look, we're already the spiritual oddballs of society. Peter makes that very clear. We're strangers and aliens in this world. Don't add to it by being extra weird, okay? So, by the way, if you're not laughing at this point, you're probably the person I need to be talking to, okay? So, be able to talk about other things besides Christianity or about pro-life apologetics. Every church seems to have, and I hope I'm not stepping on anybody's toes here this morning. No, Pastor Matt didn't say this to me, but I know this is true. In almost every church, there's that one guy or that one gal who's so passionate about whatever it is they're passionate about, let's say abortion, that when you see them on Sunday morning, they can't even say hello to you. The first thing out of their mouth is, we have to boycott Pepsi. It's supporting Planned Parenthood. It's like, could we just say hello to each other for a minute? Don't be that guy. The guy that you run into in Walmart and you're darting around the aisle to get away from him. It's like, oh, I don't want to talk to him, right? We don't want to be that. Be able to talk about other things. Be able to talk about sports or music or rock collecting or whatever it is you're into, collecting bugs, whatever, okay? John Lennox, who I mentioned earlier as a kind of a hero of mine, I love this man. I don't know him. I've never met him. I'd like to. But he's a professor of mathematics at Oxford University, which I have nothing in common with him along those lines. I can't add 2 + 2. But he's also a very, very, very capable Christian and pro-life apologist. And he said this, he said, many of us are monomaniacs when it comes to the Christian faith. That's all we can talk about, and people find us profoundly boring. Now, hopefully that's not true of anybody here, but we don't want to be like that. And then, secondly, give people their space. If I can revert back to my story about Reagan on the plane, I gave him his space. When the plane took off, I didn't wait for him to quit talking to me and open his book. I was the one that said, well, hey, I hope you have a good flight. And I stopped talking. Now, we weren't into the conversation at that point about abortion, but later when I came back to it, I made it a point to be the one to end the conversation. Now, that may sound strange to you, but it actually brings me to this point. When appropriate, be the one to end the conversation. It's a way of testing people. It's a way of gauging their interest. Now, obviously, if you're working as a pregnancy care center consultant or counselor, and you've got a woman in your office who's considering aborting her baby, that's not the time to end the conversation. That's why I said when it's appropriate. But this is particularly good counsel when you've got a brother-in-law, a family member, a friend, somebody that you're going to see again. Not a guy on a plane necessarily, but as with Reagan, I did it even there. Be the one to say, well, thanks for sharing that with me, and then move on. I did this with Reagan. After I shared a little bit with him about my work, he came back with I was ready to let it go. I did let it go, but he came back. That told me I could go there. He was giving me permission to go there. When the plane landed, I said, I was the one that ended the conversation and said, well, Reagan, it's really been a pleasure to talk to you. Here's my business card. If I can ever answer any questions for you, I'd love to do that. We got in the aisle. That's when he asked me about 36 years of marriage. What's your secret? If we're willing to let people out of the conversation, and if they know that, they're more likely to either stay with that conversation or to return to it at a later date. Remember, it's God's work, God's Spirit's work to do the heavy lifting. Our job is just to be faithful. If I can only take the person to first base, I'll trust that God will put you on the plane next time to get them to second base. I don't have to do that. So I hope these things are helpful. We'll take just a minute or two here. It's 11:35. We'll give you 2 questions. Is that all right? All right. Anybody got a question? If you can make it kind of quick, we'll get to a couple of you, and then we'll call it a day. Nobody has a question because everybody's ready to go home. I get it. I understand. Anybody? Okay, that's fine. It has been, I say this with all sincerity, what an absolute delight to be with you. You really do have something special here. It's clear, Barb and I were commenting before the service started, it's like these people know each other, they love each other. It's really something special. God bless you in that. I do hope our paths cross again. If you are interested, is it through the doors to the right? Yeah. Through the doors to the right is our display. My books are there if you're interested. They're $10. We can take a check or cash if you're interested. If we're not out there, is that money bag on the table? No, we'll get it out. Anyways, you can make change in the money bag, but forget it. So we'll be back at the table. If I can help you with anything else, reach out to me. You can get a hold of me through projectlifevoice.com through the website. So God bless. Thank you, Pastor Matt.
Mike and Barb for being here in the ministry with us. Thank you. All right, why don't let's stand together and let's close and devote ourselves to the Lord as we leave our gathering. Lord, thank you so much for the hope of the gospel, and thank you that you have opened our eyes to our need for Christ. And we pray that we would be salt and light as we go into the world this week. May we not think more of ourselves than we ought to, but to consider others more important than ourselves, and help us to do that with what we do and how we speak with people. And may the gospel be adorned with our lives and speech, that Christ would be magnified. We thank you for the privilege to be together today, and we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.